Good morning. Thank you so much for coming today. It's really good to see so many of you here at the Charlotte Street Hotel. I'm Rufus Olins, I'm the Chief Executive of Newsworks, and my role here is just to introduce the presentations this morning and explain what it is that we're going to do. But before I do that, I just wanted to give you a very brief piece of sort of background to how it is that we got here, which is that at Newsworks, we did a little analysis of the top 100 advertisers and to see how people were using newspapers or news brands in all of their forms. And what emerged was that everybody was using news brands to a meaningful extent, except for one category. And that category was comparison websites. And so we thought, well, this is something we would really like to challenge. We'd like to challenge some of the assumptions behind the media that comparison websites use. And we began a conversation with Mediacom and MoneySuperMarket, the biggest of all the comparison websites, about why it is that they did things in the way that they do and to look at some hypotheses to think about how things could be done differently. So what we've got today is the client story, and a story that we think has implications not just for the comparison website sector, but other sectors and planning media generally. So the format of the morning is that my colleague Vanessa Clifford is going to talk to you about the hypotheses that we presented to Mediacom and MoneySuperMarket, what it was we wanted them to think about. And then Gareth Helm, the Director of Brand at MoneySuperMarket, is going to explain to you what actually happened, why it is that they embarked on some tests and the results that emerged. After that, we're going to have a panel discussion, and we're really delighted today to have two of the leading research and strategy people in the UK, and that's Sue Uniman and Joe Rigby, and I'll say a little bit more about them when we get to the panel. But I'm going to hand over now to Vanessa, and we promised that we'd be out of here by 10 o'clock, so I'm now going to hand over to Vanessa. Thank you very much.
Cool. Morning. Right, I'm going to take you through the first stage of this, which is when we all connected. This actually started off when, as Rufus said, we looked at this sector and had given Danny and his team at MediaCom a call and said, you know, we've been looking at this and we think we've got a fairly good case as to why news brands should be involved. We've looked at all of the different parts of this and we'd like to talk you through this. So you'll be very grateful to hear that I'm not going to take you through the full set of deck of charts that we took them through at the time. They probably run to about 50 of them. So I am going to just take out of it a few highlights, and then I'll hand you over to Gareth, who is actually who you're really here to see. But this is just a quick snapshot of actually what was all anyone saw at the comparison sites, along with some online, which were the TV commercials. And we, like all good trade bodies, had a little dig around and found ourselves a little look at the share of what comparison sites did. Now, MoneySuperMarket were a little stage ahead of the rest of them, who, as you can see there, the red bit's going to be us all the way through these, that on average they were spending 1%, and 1% doesn't constitute a meaningful amount of much. MoneySuperMarket were ahead of the game with that, with 3%, and they were doing a really good job with the Best Buy tables and everything like that you see in all of the papers at the weekend. They were sponsoring that, which was a really nice holding for them to have there. But one of the things that we kind of went to both of these, with both MoneySuperMarket and Mediacom with, was actually what the sectors that they actually work with were doing. So if we look at, for example, the first one, which is finance, they're spending 17% in news brands. You move on to motors, another huge sector for them, they were spending 18%. Utilities, a massive 25%. Broadband is up to 36% of their spend, and 33% for consumer mobiles and networks. And that made us think, and I think it made those guys think, because ultimately all of those 5 sectors can't be getting it that wrong. So we sat there and we came up with these 5 hypotheses that Rufus just mentioned. Now, we were a little brave with these. We weren't saying that we were necessarily 100% right with every single one of them, but it's always good to start with a theory around something. And this was for us actually what news brands could do and would add to any MoneySuperMarket campaign. And our belief was that actually one of the things they can do is they can really reach people when they're looking to buy something. they can extend reach across different platforms. And that's not only our platforms as news brands, because as we all know, they're not just paper anymore, they exist on tablet, PC, mobile, but also with other platforms of other media. There's a real opportunity to communicate a breadth and depth of range. It's a lot easier within any form of a news brand ad to talk about multiple products compared to doing that on TV. Or extend it using, not focus on motor insurance, but maybe look at travel, maybe look at loans or ISAs or something like that. Supercharging TV is an area that we've all talked about for a while here. Everyone in this room knows as well as I do that 2 media is better than 1, 3 is even better, and 4 often better again. But it's not only that in terms of incremental coverage that works, but actually the idea of layering of messages. So you layer a message and you end up with a halo effect. It can be the same message, or you can start looking at different brand extensions, but the two add up really well. And within the presentation, we used a few examples of campaigns that we thought were doing this brilliantly. Virgin was one of them, and John Lewis is a really good example, where actually what they do on TV doesn't necessarily translate creatively exactly the same into their press campaigns, but you kind of always have a feeling that it's John Lewis. So we took that. And then last of all, ultimately, all of these things will increase differentiation and consideration. We had to be bold with this. We were going, it will happen, definitely. We kind of crossed our fingers. The next thing that we did is something else you need to do when you're ever going to tell someone how they should be doing their campaign, maybe slightly better, is we had a little bit of a replan. A bit cheeky, and it's one of those things you can do. Now, as I said, at the time, Money Supermarket was sponsoring the Best Buy tables in Sunday, so the very first section of that shows what happens for 1 week coverage of what they're doing. We took the same spend, took a little bit of ratings out of telly, always the first step again, and replanned it into some Monday press and said, you know what, you can gain some good incremental coverage there. When you start looking at that across 4 weeks, it starts making a real impact. It was one element of the things that we were talking about. Another bit that we did, as I said, I'm not showing you all 50 charts here, is actually show how TV and press can work together, back again to this concept of supercharging. Because these guys over here are the heavy newspaper readers on the very far left of the screen for you. And looking just at motors, we can see here that the people who are planning to buy a new car in the next 6 months, or their household are, both massively over-indexed. Now that's one of the key indicators for when you start looking at things like car insurance. When you renew it and when you buy a new car, you generally don't randomly, middle of a wet Wednesday in January, suddenly go, oh, my car insurance, not, let's have a look at some new stuff. Similarly, these are the areas that TV underperforms. Put the two together and you have a really good case. So those are just a quick snapshot of some of the background and some of the work that we did, first with MediaCom and then the two of us then took to speak to Gareth and his team. So at this point, we'd connected and we'd moved over and it was part of the consideration phase. So that's me done and time to hand over to the man you're really here to hear. So Gareth.
Right, so let me just start off then. Now, I'm hoping you all know what Money Supermarket is, but we are the largest price comparison site. Put that in context, we pretty much compare everything. So if I go into insurance alone, we'd have 16 different sort of products. So that's car insurance, home insurance, wedding insurance, boiling insurance. We have an enormous range of insurance products. We also have a whole load of home products, broadband, energy, mobile phone. In fact, at the moment, there's probably 500,000 different mobile phone offers on our site. It goes on and it goes on. 147 different providers in motor insurance. So we are a pretty big company, but we're virtual. We don't actually have any shops you can go into, so our advertising is absolutely critical and vital for us. This just gives you an idea in terms of the sort of traffic we get. So if I break it down, I'd say in insurance, we get about 40 million visits a year. In money, you get about 40 million visits a year. In home meaning things like broadband, energy, kind of household bills, get about 30 million. So we're talking pretty big numbers here. And if I start shifting numbers by 1-2%, it's massive. So just to sort of set up, it is virtual, but there are a shed load of people. So you're talking kind of, add that up, that's over 100 million people a year kind of coming to our site. So just a bit about our consumers overall. Now, who doesn't want to save money? Basically, we all do. Let's face it, everyone wants to save money. But this gives you a little bit of a blend in terms of how the ages work. There is clearly a sweet spot in the middle of families, probably a bit more savvy, and they've got kind of more kind of need to sort of save. And and it varies. At this end, Silver Surfers are actually much more on our savings products, so the likes of ISAs. Some of the saving products we have online kind of very much appeal to them, but there is kind of a diversity here. And at the other end, some young drivers are kind of very interested in our kind of black box insurance products where it's kind of cheaper for them. So we have got a vast array here. But any way we can start moving this, and if I can start picking up some younger people, great. So I'm kind of just having your mind, we have got a very broad and diverse age group. So let's just jump into objectives. So, I've got a pretty good campaign right now. I've got Jeff, I've got Dave, I've had Bill. They've all saved money on the car insurance. They've shot off into space. They've done all sorts of different things, and it's been very good. But, actually, what else can I do? How else can I get more people to my site? Because there is the Google moment of truth. And for me, you're thinking car insurance, you're at the Google screen, what are you going to type in? And it's critical for me that people think Money Supermarket. And, all I can do is rely upon their mental brains and what's kind of sitting in there. So I've got to think about what I can do with my comms to drive that up. And that then drives my web visits. So I've got to get in their brains, and whatever comms I do, I'm going to drive it up. Second thing is consideration. And that's overall, within price comparison sites, most people are shopping 2 to 3 sites. You know what? And they're pretty much the same. They'll flip-flop from one to the other. And will they remember the last site? No, probably not. And quite often people will kind of come to our site and say, buy from us and say, where's my toy? They don't really remember. So there is it is, and what's really important for us, therefore, is not just to be front of mind, but they start differentiating us. And they start saying, I buy from you because of this. I buy from you because of that. So it's really important we start driving consideration and making our brand sort of distinctive against the competitive set. Now, the last thing is, we have got a massively diverse product range. And actually, it's quite hard to pull the levers on everything when you've got so many products. But we're really interested in exploring, can we actually start pulling the levers on other products in a kind of quite a cost-effective way? So I am wanting web visits, I am wanting to have some differentiation, and I am wanting to kind of think about how can I get my portfolio to kind of work a little bit better. So that's the kind of context of what I was looking at going into this test. Now, in terms of the test, there were 2 parts to it. Scotland, where we did some motor insurance press activity with TV, and then in the south we did our money products. So that's like loans, credit cards, a kind of diverse kind of portfolio. And what we're looking here to see is, okay, what's the combined effect of a motor press campaign with a motor TV campaign, and what's the effect of you've got motor TV going on, but you've kind of got other products going on here. What's happening? How does the blend work between them? And to put them in context, our spend is probably about 800 to 1,000 TVRs a month in terms of TVs. We are a heavy spender overall. But what's going on here? What's different? How does that work? And then we also had quite a diverse range of ads. So you can see in the blue, which again is motor, this is, we started playing around with the messaging. We thought, well, let's see actually how does messaging work? What's going to be different here? So we started off with a fairly straight save £300. We then went to 99% could save, but very focused on motor and different messages within motor. You come into England and Wales, we're looking at kind of ISAs. We were looking at credit cards. We were looking at loans. Again, this is me trying to play my portfolio. Let's think about how things work differently. Can I pull a lever on one of these bespoke products? We even did a money sale, and we even did energy bills as well. We kind of dropped in different things. Now, what I'm showing you there, that is press execution, generally speaking, kind of 25 by 4, but we also did tablets, and we also had some displays. It wasn't just press. It was kind of using all of the different sort of suites available. So that's where it starts. Now, what I'm going to go into is we tested it 2 ways. One was econometrics, which is a really complicated way of just saying we split everything out and we were able to kind of tease out all the factors and just look specifically at what did the kind of Newsworks activity do. So we were able to kind of take out our TV, we were able to take out activity in SEM and SEO. We stripped it back. And if you have any really hard questions, I have got Michelle here who will answer them at the back. But we did econometrics, so it is kind of really rigorous in terms of getting down to the nuts and bolts. We also tracked with HPI and we looked at what people's perceptions were. So that's quantitative, but it's actually people's view in terms of what happened. So you've got hard numbers with quantitative views and actually what they did. And I'll go through both of those. And I start off really with the econometrics, and this is a pretty big number really. Yeah. So this now is looking at what did on the money side of things, the England and Wales. In England and Wales, what did we actually do to visits? So in the activity we did, how did that drive visits? Now this is the average. So average of those activities drove an increase of 6.2%. Now averages, there's an average, so actually there's some specific products which actually scored a lot better than that. But that actually for us is like, well, that's a big number. So for us to start driving a money business, again, I kind of put in context, that's 30 million visits a year in money. If I'm starting to drive some movement in that, that's a big number. Within that, of course, there was credit cards. We had a great loan rate. We had a great loan rate. We had a great credit card offer with some really exciting stuff. But we're getting kind of really good visits through. So that's as I said, England and Wales. If I go to Scotland, it's a slightly different story in Scotland. This is what we had when we had motor press with motor TV, and that was 1.3%. That may seem a small figure, but that actually, from a brand and a commerce perspective, is a big number. Again, I come back down to, if you put that in the context of 40 million people coming to insurance, 1%, 400,000 people, that's big, and you then get conversion, blah, blah, blah. By the time you kind of take that through, that is still a significant kind of contribution for us overall. So both tests were showing that we're actually getting increased visits and inquiries through to our site, whether it be through the money products or whether it be through the insurance products. So how did it actually work? And this is where we get into a little bit more about what the actual different tests showed. And first of all, this is we were actually breaking down on a kind of daily basis to see what the visits were. So every day I could see what I was getting. That's the beauty of being a web-based business, great data, and I can actually drill and I'd say, right, that day that happened. But we were able also to tease out what happened the next day and tease out what happened from the activity that day, but also from the day before. And we found there was actually a kind of carryover effect. The majority of the activity, majority of the uplift happened on the same day, bang. But the next day there was a carryover of 20%. So you could see a kind of a build effect kind of coming through. So here, for example, that's the bill from before, but this week, that was having that contribution. So that day was having the contribution, the week after. So there was this kind of flow over of activity. So now let me just go on to kind of numbers a bit more. I guess you've probably had a few numbers already, but a critical part for us is return on investment. So you do anything, we want this to perform. And I've got a couple of numbers here to show how it comes up. And I will put these in context for you, because you probably go like, oh, what's that mean? So this is, for every pound I spent, I got 43p back. Now, on face value, you might go, oh, hang on, that's not great. But that is significantly better than radio. I'm not going to say what it is, but that is significantly better than radio. And it's hot on the heels of our TV activity. So that also is only short term. So that is the immediate effect of what was happening. And what we do is we don't just look at it on a short term, we like to look at it on a long term basis. And we believe there's a multiplier of 2.5 times. And we think this is actually probably what the true effect is. So as I said, we kind of look at it short term and the immediate effect, but there's also going to carry over in terms of what you do in terms of mental availability. And we believe the ROI was over £1. So for us, that's the result. So to get anything which is scoring over £1 is good. And as I said, put in the context of my wider media mix, it was scoring better than other things I was doing at the time. Right, now a little bit more in terms of breaking that down, because we then looked at the different platforms available, and we looked at the 3 levers we had. So we had print, we had some online, and we had tablets. As I said at the beginning, we were doing creative, but it was going through all these different levels. And these seem really small, but this is the actual percentage of total visits coming to our site from that. So if you go and say, well, get 6.5 million visits per month, I could actually say there was 0.33, 0.12. So we're kind of getting, I could see this strip, and that actually, as I said, is a fairly big number overall. And you look at it, and you go, actually, well, that's, clearly the print is doing really well here. You go, print is the best lever overall, and then you probably say the tablet, and then you say the online. But when we actually then broke down and looked at the kind of cost of it all, it changed slightly. And this tablet was the one which overall was having the best effect. On a pure kind of cost basis, we're seeing that the incremental visits per pound spent was higher here than it was on the likes of the press. So that was a really interesting finding for us. I think potentially people could have kind of act instantly then and progress through to our site as opposed to press, which is a little bit kind of more sort of latent. So that's kind of the econometrics part. And again, we can drill into that more in questions. And I said I've got Michelle at the back. The next part is much more the HPI work, is what consumers felt and they said. And again, this is quant-based. And I have got my faithful companion, John, who will answer the questions on this later. But this now looks at what people were saying about having seen the advertising, what's making them kind of feel and react. And now this is actually kind of the shifts we were seeing. This is looking at the motor insurance in Scotland. And I'll come on in a minute to talk about money. But in Scotland, we were seeing some very kind of interesting shifts. So saves me lots of money. At the end of the day, that is why you go to a price comparison site. That is the kind of critical factor you want to shift. And we're seeing that was moving. So we had a positive shift in terms of saves me lots of money. They make me feel better about them. Again, that was shifting 21%. The first website I go to in the future for savings and borrowings are better than other comparison sites. I mean, this is all about consideration here. This is where we wanted to see our brand perceptions move, and people were seeing these messages, and it was moving them on. So they'd seen the TV advert, which was giving them the spontaneous awareness, and this was moving them on in terms of their overall consideration overall. So this is a good result for the motor section of the test. And if I go on now to the same happening in England and Wales, this is now money products, very similar story. Again, we're seeing shift, have a broad range of products of savings, saves me lots of money. First site I go to in the future and are better than other comparison sites. So for me, these are key metrics I look at, and if I can get press helping to kind of move them on, it was ticking the box in terms of kind of helping the perception of the brand move. We then took that and we then drilled in to see, so who is it though? Who actually are the people who are really moving amongst this? And we looked at 3 age groups. We looked at 1834s, 34 to 55, and 55 older. And actually every single group moved. It was 8% amongst 1834. I think it was 6% amongst the middle age group, and it was about kind of 2% amongst the older. But really interestingly, it was this younger bunch which started moving. And if you go back to the picture at the beginning, I have a hardcore bunch of people who sit in families. And it was actually quite exciting to me to see this younger bunch start to shift. So their consideration was moving overall. And it wasn't just their consideration, they were actually likely to do something about that. So this is actually increase in claims visits. So they said, yeah, you've shifted my consideration. But we then asked them a question, well, actually, did you do anything about that? Did you actually go and act upon that? And then we saw a shift of 10% saying, yes, they did. So I had, going back to my econometrics, I had visitor traffic coming in, and I'm seeing a shift in terms of a younger user base, people saying, yep, it's changed my consideration, and it drove me to actually do something about that. So if I kind of draw it to kind of some headlines, overall, ultimately, I come back to that Google moment of truth. Am I going to be able to drive people to my site? Is the activity going to get people to kind of drive web traffic? And yes, I did. I kind of definitely got a shift in terms of what I saw in terms of my money, products move, but also I saw a shift in terms of motor. So that's kind of a big tick for me overall. Second thing I talked about was differentiation and consideration. And again, I put up there, saves me lots of money. I'm better than other comparison sites. I have young people coming to my site. again, I'm getting a tick in terms of campaign increase my differentiation versus other sites. I go back to my point at the beginning, people don't know where they shop, 2 out of 3. So if I can get people to start saying, I come to that site for a reason, was great. The third thing, it comes back to the point at the beginning, we touched upon how kind of the very principle of the test. So we have TV and we have the press, and actually how are they working together? The fact is, it does work together. It did help supercharge what we're doing on TV. So we could definitely have seen a shift, and what was great was to actually see it didn't kind of undermine our ROI. We were kind of getting ROIs of the order of what we were expecting to see. So that was a tick for us. The next one was just the audience. We got in a younger audience. So I was going out there kind of quite open-minded to see what would happen. And I didn't, if I was honest, think I'd get younger. I thought I might actually get older, and I thought I might get kind of more of my core area. But what we actually got was a younger audience, which is where we were quite weak. So we're kind of growing in an area which was an opportunity for us overall. And again, amongst that audience, their consideration increased especially. So I guess it went across all the groups, but it particularly drove there. And I suppose the nuts and bolts is, what are we going to do about that then? So are we just going to sort of say, nah, no more press? Well, the fact is, no, it's part of our plan. So we do think it's part of our mix. We are heavily reliant on TV. It's very important for us to drive spontaneous awareness through TV, but we do believe that press is a kind of part of our plans going forward. So that's a kind of a snapshot. I will kind of take more questions on it. Now I'm passing over, not sure who to. Yes, over to you. Right.
Well, thank you very much, Gareth. I mean, I thought that was a really eloquent and compelling presentation, and everyone will have the opportunity to ask questions. So if you have got a question, please sort of start to formulate it in your mind. I think what we're talking about is an example of an agency and a client in particular that were prepared to challenge the way in which things were done and to look at things in an imaginative and open-minded way. And we're going to have a panel discussion now about that. And I'm really pleased that joining Gareth on the panel, we've got Sue Uniman, who you will know is the Chief Strategy Officer at MediaCom. And Sue actually has been at MediaCom and its predecessor since the beginning, since 1990, and helped grow the business to become #1 in the UK and the first agency with billings of more than £1 billion, and also Campaign's Media Agency of the Decade. And part of Sue's responsibility is to ensure that MediaCom is at the leading edge of practical NPD and also new ways of thinking. So it's going to be fascinating to hear what she's got to say about this particular case study, and also what it means more broadly. And we also have with us Jo Rigby, who many of you will know from her role at Omnicom Media Group, where she was for 12 years, latterly as Global Insight Director, with responsibility for research and analytics. She was Managing Director of MESH, the real-time experience research agency, and has worked with many of the country's biggest brands, including More Than, Sky and LG. And Jo is currently working as an independent research and strategy consultant. So please, if you can find your way onto the very high stools, I'll come over and join you. Gareth, can I just ask you a question first of all, which is that we know that as a sector, it was all working very well, not just for you, but also your competitors. It's been a fantastic story of growth to get to the scale that you've got to, using the combination of media that you were using. So what was it that persuaded you to take a look at doing something different?
To be honest, the case is quite compelling when you look at the other sectors. So I must say, kind of when you say you look at motor, you look at money, you kind of go like, ooh. We are behaving a little bit different, and I think we also recognised our model was working, but we did need to get to the next level, and it was quite useful having the information to say, okay, this is how other markets are doing it, and let's have a kind of proper discussion around it, because we clearly needed to move on, and we wanted to kind of add different messages, and I think as a category, it's evolved. It's kind of gone through the different stages. It was a game of let's just shout very loudly. It's like being down a pub and sort of waving your arm and trying to get a barman's attention. But then we had to move on to start thinking about a little bit more about differentiation. And there was different needs we were starting to get to. So really compelling case from Newsworks for us to look at and understand. And then in terms of where we were as a business, it was kind of good for us to then, we needed to move to the next level. And this seemed like a perfect vehicle for us to kind of get in some new people coming in and also kind of create a different relationship with them.
Okay. So could I just ask you, having heard Vanessa's presentation and Gareth's presentation, what are your sort of your thoughts about the way in which we approach planning and evaluation generally, and sort of more, it could be in relation to this particular case study or more broadly?
I think the thing that shone out through this was that everybody approached it as a proper connected partnership. So this wasn't you guys battering down a door with pure reach arguments. I think we're all aware of the reach of newsbrands, and we're all aware of what the numbers in the purest sense are. You came in with a really persuasive argument that talked about related worlds, which is very interesting, but also talked about how you would help us not just with the campaign in the first place, but also with understanding and evaluating the campaign. And that's, you know, one of our things for this year is super connected partnerships. And a partnership has to make everybody that's involved in it feel that it's both fair and rewarding. And I think this is a brilliant example of that.
Good. I mean, Jo, would you agree that there is a tendency to use what we can measure easily, and that can dictate the choice of media that we make?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about this case study is there was the appetite to change how things were going to be measured and evaluated. And so you've got the barrier, first of all, is changing how you think with planning. And then the next barrier that's often the hardest to overcome is the measurement. And thinking about trying to measure in a different way and take some risks with that as well. And not just kind of go back to this, what we always know.
Yeah. Are there any questions from the audience? I don't know if we can put the lights on so we can see if anyone's got their hand up.
What was your initial reservations about national press?
I felt, and this is kind of my own perception, personal perception. I felt it was going to sort of bias older. I thought it was going to be much more of a, if I had some hot news I wanted to sort of talk about, it would be like all about news stuff. So if I had a kind of a great offer, or you know, when it's gone sort of thing, that's what would be I should be doing. And you know, we do occasionally have those things, but actually we do have stuff which is there for a while, like car insurance. Is kind of, you know, people are not kind of suddenly going to do their car insurance. There has to be a moment in time that they've got to be available. So it changed my view on it a bit, because obviously we were getting results back which were showing it didn't always work that way. And also things like there was a carryover, which was interesting. I thought it was going to be on the day only, but it actually did carry over slightly to the day after, to the week after. So it was it kind of hit me in terms of, yes, it's younger, it carries over, and it isn't always about immediate messaging.
I mean, one of the things I think that was quite interesting also was the young people, and there is a myth, I think, that if you use news brands, it's a way of connecting with the older people but not the younger people. I mean, Sue, do you think there are any myths or assumptions that we're making that we need to challenge more generally?
Well, the way the consumer is using, the way that the consumer generally is conducting their consumer journey is probably very, very different and evolves constantly. And we've got all sorts of heritage cliches in our head, and we've got all sorts of heritage ways of doing business, in fact. And when, you know, you and I, because, you know, you're quite old as well, started out in this business, no offence, but you'd sit in a media agency and you'd know really clearly what media did and what the roles of various media played. Now I think that's all up in the air, and genuinely now the consumer knows more. The consumer is the expert on the media journey, and perhaps media practitioners are constantly playing catch up. Because what you've got, as Gareth talked about, is it's Google's zero moment of truth. You've got use of tablets. I thought that stat about, is it 24% straight through, is really interesting, because there's something quite nice about the idea of a consumer journey whereby if you've got the time to spend with the news brand on a tablet, that's probably exactly the same sort of moment in your life when you might well be thinking about going to a price comparison website, so there's a nice correlation there. And I think we have to be imaginative and open and sort of obsessed with the consumer, actually.
Would you agree with that, Jo? I mean, how do we approach it if the consumer is ahead of where we are?
Yeah, I think it's always about challenging the assumptions. I know with the time I spent at Mesh, one of the great joys of the data there was it was about measuring experiences. And so you're getting a very different look, and one of the big perceptions that was definitely challenged through looking at that is this thing about time spent, because what we'd have is we'd have how many experiences people were having, and we'd have the value of that experience, and it wasn't always equated, not at all, no. But you have to challenge the way you're measuring it to get that kind of insight.
What can you do about measuring it differently in practical terms?
Yeah, I mean it's quite tricky, because you have your heritage of how you've been measuring it, and it's the fear of breaking with that data.
Break it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've spent the last year working a lot in Latin America, and because there's no heritage of we've always measured in this way, it's just been fantastic. It's just like, we'll measure it how we think this needs to be measured, and unfortunately in the UK we're quite stuck to tradition, so we've got to be more Latin American about our measurement.
More open-minded. That's excellent. Are there any other questions? There's one over here.
This is a slightly broader question, but what do you think the future holds for the price comparison category?
Well, the thing is, I think saving is, we're always going to want to save. So basically, I think it's, we're a massively growing category, and we will continue to, and I think it'll get, it's a lucrative business in terms of saving, because we're genuinely helping customers properly. I think ultimately it's going to get much more into differentiation, because then we ultimately need to start, as I said, it's a cycle of shouting down the pub and being loud, to actually kind of get into relationships with people, and actually starting to properly get people to see the differences between each of the different brands. I think at the moment it's quite hard to see a difference. One person might give you, it's literally a fluffy toy is differentiating a category, which is really nonsense. It's got to get deeper and more meaningful.
Dave Trott tells this great story, creative legend Dave Trott, about how advertising should work, because he says, if he comes home, he's a traditional old-fashioned man, Dave Trott, or purports to be. He goes, if he wants a cup of tea, he says, if basically he can't just sit in the chair and not get his wife's attention. He goes, so all right, so he'll shout, he'll go, ka, ka. Right, but that's not enough, is it? Because he's got her attention, but actually she's just annoyed with him at shouting him. So so then he has to communicate what he wants, and so he'll go and make us a cup of tea. Now, will that get him a cup of tea? No, I don't think so. Then he has to think about having a relationship with her and having a contract with her, and then he'll go, Kath, if I put the bins out later, would you make me a cup of tea? That's when he closes the deal. And I think, that's what we're talking about, isn't it? It's kind of the fact that it's a fluffy toy at the moment seems in a serious category that's about something we all care about.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about one particular example, but if you apply that to persuading clients to do things differently, what kind of dialogue might lead to more imaginative thinking and perhaps challenging assumptions?
Well, I think I think it comes back to partnership again, and I think you put together a compelling argument that wasn't just shouting. So we've all seen arguments before where not just newspapers, but any particular medium will come along and tell you what amazing stats it's got. I mean, this audience probably isn't aware that out of home is very good for young adults because they're out of home a lot. But that's what TJ will tell you, and that's great as an argument, but it doesn't actually get you anywhere. So you kind of put some thoughtfulness into the argument, but again, also it was a partnership. The whole thing was a partnership in a very real sense all the way through, and I think that shared risk. That's the world that we're in these days. Actually, kind of Google itself put us there. The stable door is open. We have to actually appreciate that we're in a situation whereby, if we want compelling arguments for making big changes, that we all have to put not just our reputation, but actually put our money where our mouth is. I think.
What about you, Gareth? I mean, what from your perspective, are the biggest obstacles to doing things differently and perhaps learning from other sectors?
I think it's interesting is that you, I guess at the end of the day, you get into a cycle of planning every year. And of course, your CEO looks at your plan and he says, well, your TV plan's that, your TV's plan's that. And there is a degree of, how are you comparing year on year? And when you start putting something new in, there's always the inevitable kind of, well, why? And it's, and I guess you just
how can you prove it?
And you just got to be able to, you've just got to get, because there is a degree of, people want to see you doing what you're doing as the kind of basic level. You keep doing the same as almost like level one, and you've got to have the arguments. I mean, you've got to kind of I guess you've got to put your neck out a bit and saying, I really believe in this. You need some evidence to get into it, because it's the easy thing for any CEO to start saying, well, haven't done that before. And that's the challenge spot. So you end up keep doing what you're doing. I guess you just got to have the evidence and then be able to take people through a journey for them to understand and come on board. And it just takes a bit of time. So this was quite good for us to do it and start getting the evidence to start, educating the business and also like opening the door. I think now we've done this, we kind of feel a bit braver to do other things.
I mean, Joe, would you agree with that? I mean, where does the evidence come from? You haven't yet done it, so you've got to, in a sense, to have conviction. So where does that conviction come from that you will get the evidence?
Because you don't want to be the follower on this one, and it's great to have a leader in front. I think it's a lot of it is about the hypothesis and just having real faith and some evidence that the hypothesis is going in a certain direction. Nobody wants to take blind leaps, and there's enough data out there to support most hypotheses, and then just be brave enough to take the next leap. And this is a happy ending, which is great, but it's okay if it's not, because you just need to keep building on that one.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I guess the big question is that if it was 3% of your budget previously, it was spending with these brands, what would it be in the future?
Well, it's going to be 100% clearly. Well, I'm not going to tell you that, am I? I just think it's an important part of our mix now, and I think it depends on what the activity is going to be. I mean, I've been kind of quite candid here in terms of giving you numbers, but I think it's something which I think work better than others, and I think in those areas, it depends on. It kind of comes down to a number of factors. It depends on the products we have available. It depends on the news we have available. It depends on the market. But we are, definitely part of our mix. But I'm not going to give you a number.
More than 3.
Sorry?
More than 3.
I'm not going to tell you. It's part of our mix.
Okay, we've got one final question from the floor, and then I've got a question. And I did say we'd finish before 10, and I want to make sure that we do. So at the back there.
Did you see press kind of drive any category more or any individual products? In England, you did a much more varied portfolio approach than it seems you did in Scotland.
Yeah, I think the thing is that, so if I go into the England test, what was quite, things like, it comes down to a number of things. I think what we did was we did ISAs, we did loans, we did credit cards, we had quite a lot of varied amount of stuff. And I think, in a sense, it comes down to the old nugget of like, you've got to do the right thing at the right time. And like ISAs, it's kind of like you do ISAs. There is a really clear season for ISAs, and if you got good product at the right time, it kind of works. So some things worked better because it was bringing things together at that time, and it worked. Again, other times when we had great products, sometimes there were certain moments we had really, really hot products which we could talk about, and it worked really well. And I think in a sense, you've just got to look at the creative a little bit on it, because the creative and the product and the insight was helping some things versus others. So I think that particularly within money, we had quite a lot of diverse messaging going on, and when we kind of got things being more insightful, it was working better. But the thing which was interesting though is put that in contrast with motor, where actually it's not really like a call to action. You can't like say, suddenly, come on, do your car insurance, because you're only going to be in it at a certain moment in time. And even when we didn't have this like wowie message, you had the constant interest. It was still working, but at a lower level. Of course, you've only got whatever it's going to be, a small factor of people who are ever in the market at that one time. So I come back down to, I think if you can be really insightful, great creative will work, but you can have a constant reminding awareness coming through on more kind of slower categories.
Thank you very much. I mean, my final question is that, I think today we have seen a very brave client in MoneySuperMarket and a very candid client, but there's a danger sometimes with these events that you listen to a case study and then you go back to the office and you just don't do anything differently, and you sort of put that in its box. And what I'd like to ask each of you, starting with Joe, is what are you perhaps thinking about as a result of this work, and what would you like people to go away thinking or perhaps doing differently as a result of what we've seen this morning?
Okay, so we're coming to the end of January. How many of you made resolutions? New Year's resolutions? No one made New Year's
Not many.
resolutions. Okay, great. So it'd be good to go like, let's have February as the New Year's resolution, but not about not drinking and not smoking and going to the gym, but about taking 5 things that you always do in the same way and going, I'm going to make a resolution to just challenge myself on that. Because we all do it, don't we? We just get stuck in the rut.
So a February resolution.
Yes.
What about you, Sue?
I think it's zero-sum planning. It's don't start from last year's plan. I mean, that's kind of the easiest thing to do, isn't it? Is sort of take 5% off or put 5% on. Start from the consumer again, reevaluate the category. Where's the source of growth going to come from? And then any way to deliver that has got to be considered.
Thank you. And what about you, Gareth?
Well, I guess I'll build on that really, because it ultimately comes down to your customers, your consumers, what you're trying to do. And I think it's not being entrenched in what you've always done, because I kind of feel like, we had a task at hand, we knew what we were trying to do, and it could have been so easy to say, let's do the old thing again then. But if you've always done what you've always done, nothing changes. So how the hell are you going to hit your targets? So sometimes you've got to do something different to get to the numbers you need to get to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would really like to thank all of you for coming on the last Friday in January to this lovely screening room. I'd love to thank Joe for joining us on the panel, to Sue and MediaCom for you for being here today, and for MediaCom for helping facilitate this.
Danny did all the work. Where are you,
And Danny in particular at the back. He said he's hiding at the back. He doesn't want any difficult questions. And Gareth, of course, who's been fantastic to work with and has helped us produce this wonderful case study. Thank you so much for everything. Please show your appreciation. There will be more case studies. If you want to talk to us about anything, please get in contact, and we hope to see you very soon at the next Newsworks event. Thank you.